Ni hao, everyone. Hello, welcome to Genealogy Garage. I am Julie Huffman, the genealogy librarian at the Los Angeles Public Library. And Genealogy Garage is our program in which we present topics related to the world of genealogy and beyond. We are co-sponsored by the Southern California Genealogical Society. In fact, as a side note related to today's talk, the Southern California Genealogical Society, located in Burbank, has several ethnic interest groups that meet to discuss specific aspects of genealogy. And one of these is a Chinese interest genealogy group facilitated by one moment. I'm having trouble finding my mouse. Excuse me, please. Crying out loud. Hang in there, gang. All right, here we go. It's facilitated by the Chinese Family History Group of Southern California. Now, CFHG has public meetings and webinars and can help you research and document your own family history. They meet at a variety of places, and this link will take you to events and information happening at or via the Southern California Genealogical Society. So if you have the bug for genealogy, like I think you might, and your area of research includes Chinese family history, you are definitely going to want to contact these very knowledgeable and friendly people. If there's anything you've been interested in learning about, or you just want to join my email group to be notified of upcoming events, just shoot me an email here. Right there's my email address. Feel free to write me anytime. This session is being recorded, so it will be available to watch immediately after we're done today. So don't worry about taking too many notes. You can always rewatch it via our YouTube channel. Now, to ask questions today or make comments, you need to be logged into a YouTube account. So go ahead and do that. And once you do that, you can type comments or questions in the chat box or the comments box. I'll keep track of your questions and then ask our presenter when they come up. Now, before I get started, I just wanted to mention an aside. I am listening to a dynamite audiobook that just might be of interest to you, to those of you crazy about all things Chinese. Let me share the screen for a moment. The audiobook is called The Fox Wife, and it's just great. It's written and read by Yang Si Chu, and it takes place in 1800s Manchuria. I'm sorry, 1908, Manchuria, China. And it's so well written. And she is such a great reader also. I can't recommend it highly enough. You can check out this ebook and zillions more for free at this URL. Basically, you just use your library card, go to our eMedia area at emedia.lapl.org, and you can check out zillions of e-audiobooks. And if you haven't yet embarked into the world of free audiobooks you can download to your phone to listen to while you're in the car or while you're waiting at the doctor's office, please try it. I am completely addicted and can't wait to get back to this book before it expires. Now today, we're starting an early kickoff to the Los Angeles Public Library's Asian American Pacific Islander Joy Month, which officially starts in May. This link will show you all the marvelous events and activities our library has set up to celebrate this wonderful month. So check it out when you have a chance. So to celebrate this Heritage Month in a genealogy sense, we've invited back our friend, Clotilde from My China Roots. Hi, Clotilde.
Hi. Hi.
So My China Roots is a relatively new database here at the Los Angeles Public Library. In fact, as Clotilde knows, I'm fond of saying we were the first public library in the nation to subscribe to it. And because we subscribe to it, you can use it for free if you have a library card. And if you have a library card, you can even access it from home. And so before I have Clotilde dive into her presentation, I want to quickly show how you would do that, because this is the database she's talking about today. So I want to make sure you know how you can access it from home if you have a library card. So let me again share my screen. And you're going to want to go to our homepage, which is www.lapl.org, and scroll down the page until you see research. And then you're going to click this button, and this is how you get to all of our databases. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, and it takes us to a page that has an alphabetical listing of all of the wonderful databases we have. I am just going to click on M to go down to the M section real fast. And here we see My China Roots. And so at home, you just click on this link. It's going to ask you for your library card number. Type it in, and then all of a sudden, this fabulous database comes up, and you can search your Chinese heritage. And that's how you get into all of our databases. So just remember how to do that. All right, one moment. Okay, so last year, Clotilde gave us an overview of My China Roots. You can actually watch that again by going to this address. You just type that into your address bar and you'll go right to that video. So after this presentation, if you want to see that, which is an overview of My China Roots, go right ahead. The recording is going to be up forever, so you can just take your time with that. Also, below the screen you're currently looking at, there is a link that will take you to a flyer for My China Roots. So that's kind of handy. It gives you a lot of information on that flyer. So feel free to take a look at that. And if you have trouble viewing it, email me and I will send you it after this presentation. And today, so since last year, Clotilde talked to us about everything that My China Roots has to offer genealogists. Today's session is going to focus on Chinese naming practices, which can be essential in helping you find your ancestors. Clotilde is the Global Collections Manager for My China Roots, and there's not a better person to dive into this subject to show you how you can use names to navigate My China Roots. She's joining us today from London, and it's 7 p.m. her time, and we're so happy to have her share her weekend with us. Clotilde, so nice to see you, as always, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Julie, for the wonderful intro. I love working with you guys, so I'm more than happy to be here and talking about a very different topic to the one that we discussed last year. So, okay. I guess we can get started, and I'll share my screen. So as Julie said, today we're going to be talking about Chinese names, and specifically, how do you overcome challenges concerning Chinese names, not only Chinese naming practices, but translation of Chinese names as they relate to male and female ancestors after they left China. So I'm going to be covering a variety of topics. I'll start with a brief introduction of the database and My China Roots in general. We'll maybe share some of the challenges that we are all facing when doing Chinese genealogy research. I'll also talk through some of the most common Chinese name types and categories: nicknames, milestone names, paper names. And finally, throughout my talk, I'll be giving some examples of case studies that are taken straight from the database. So whenever I've included an image, it will have been mostly from the My China Roots database. Okay, so to start with, for those who don't know about us, My China Roots is a family history platform for anyone that has some Chinese heritage. So this could be, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. We have over 2.5 million records of overseas Chinese ancestors. So these are records that are usually in English, sometimes have some Chinese on them, but mostly they're going to be in English. And they are actually primarily from North America. We have a few other collections that are from Southeast Asia and the Caribbean, but mostly they're going to be from North America. So we're talking about immigration records, census records, association, business directories, what else? Tombstones, immigration. I said immigration records already. Okay, so that's for the English language records. And then we also have a very large collection of Chinese family tree books. So these are records that come directly from China. And there's an estimated over 200 million names in these collections. So I'll be showing you examples of both of these types of documents. Now, like Julie said, the database is available to anyone who has a Los Angeles Public Library card. So if you're at the library and you just type in mychinarootslibrary.com, you should be redirected to the search interface. We're also available at a few other public libraries, which are in California, San Francisco, and Alameda County. We also recently became available at the Boston Public Library and also at Berkeley and Stanford. If you are interested in your public library subscribing, then definitely reach out to me. I wonder if I can drop my email, or if Julie, you wouldn't mind dropping my email in the video. That way, yeah, my email is at the end of the slides as well, but please do contact me. So our database is available to public libraries, like I said. This is ideal because then you can search for free as much as you like. But we also offer access to individuals. So if you wanted to, you could also get a personal subscription. When it comes to access to the records and all of the archives, it's exactly the same whether you log in through your library or through a personal account. The main difference with a personal account, which costs about $90 a year, is that you have a lot of additional personalized features. You can build your own family tree, and you can get record notifications that are tailored to your family tree. So if our system finds a match between our database and your tree, you would get an email about it immediately. So you don't have to be checking in manually all the time. We do have a little special discount that we're offering to anyone that is watching this right now or that will be watching it. And it's valid until the end of this month, not this month, next month, until the end of May, on any personal subscriptions. So any new subscriptions that are started between now and the end of May, just use this code and you'll get 10% off. Okay, so these are the main offerings of My China Roots. So before we begin, I wonder if we could all, take a moment to just ponder before I go through tackling the challenges and solutions to these challenges. What are some of the problems that maybe some of our listeners or watchers have faced when conducting their Chinese family history research, specifically as it pertains to names? So maybe you can have a think about it. If you feel like sharing, please do share. I'll just give us maybe a minute or two to gather our thoughts and drop some comments. Yes, and where are you joining us from today? Is everyone from LA or have you come from further afield? I've just realized I wasn't logged into my YouTube account, so I can't actually see if I can see if the LA Public Library is leaving comments, but I can't see anyone else's comments. So
I haven't seen any yet, but
okay.
are you
So I
going to
thought
be? Maybe here's a question from me,
Mhm.
who's coming in from Los Angeles. Are you going to be talking about maybe difficulties if you can't read Chinese characters? Are you going to
Yes.
cover that later? I figured.
Yes, I will. I mean, it's sort of peppered through my talk, but the assumption that we're working with at My China Roots is that most people who will be using our service and who will be using the platform don't read Chinese and don't understand Chinese. So, yeah.
That's one of the things when I've talked to patrons and friends here who are embarking on their journey. A lot of our Chinese American friends here in Los Angeles, they can speak it because they've been talking in their household with their family, but they can't read it. So they usually have to turn to others to try to translate Chinese characters into English so they can understand.
Yes. And that tends to be, that tends to be the case. So we have a few tools that I'll be showing you that can help you overcome some of these hurdles. But in some cases, there is no other way except asking, a relative to handwrite a name in Chinese. You can't guess the Chinese characters of a name, for example, unless you know the meaning of it. And I'll be talking a bit about that later. But yeah, that is a very good point, an excellent question. Okay, so I'll just keep moving on. I can discuss some of the challenges that I've observed over the years, having worked with many families who've been embarking on this journey. So there are several possible scenarios. When it comes to names, your Chinese ancestors, they may have names that are made up of 2 words, or they may also have names made up of 3 or 4 words or even more. They'll have sometimes an English sounding name, like this kid on the left-hand side who's called Richard. He has an English name, Richard Wong, and he has a Chinese name, Wong Kim Ying. Sometimes the same person will have several different names, like in this case, and sometimes they'll have the same name but spelled differently. So these are all very typical scenarios. It is very common, in fact, to find names that are spelled differently. So don't be afraid, I would say, of these variations. Which brings me to my first tip, I would say, which is even more important when you don't read Chinese, is to try to find the Chinese characters of your ancestors' names. This is the tip that we give everyone as a starting point. And it is even, like I said, even more important when you don't read Chinese. And I'll explain why. But going really back to the basics, I thought I'd start by explaining what Chinese names are made up of, to give you a sense of why it's so important to figure out the Chinese translation or the Chinese characters. So typically, Chinese surname is made up of 1 character. So, for example, Wong is a Chinese surname. My surname is Yap, also 1 character. Very, very occasionally, you'll find surnames that are made up of 2 characters, like Sito. This is quite rare, though. Vast majority will be made up of 1 character. Meanwhile, the given name is typically made up of either 2 characters or 1 character, like Kim Ying or Gui Ying, or my name is also rhymes. It's called Mei Ling, my Chinese name. Occasionally, it will only be made up of 1 character, as in the case of Wang Fong right at the bottom. Today, the vast majority of given names are made up of 2 characters. Now, traditionally in China, you would always place and state when you introduce yourself, you'd always introduce yourself by placing your surname first. So I wouldn't be introducing myself as Mei Ling Yap. I would always say, oh, my name is Yap Mei Ling. And this definitely confused immigration officers in the early days when they were first encountering Chinese people arriving in the United States. They didn't realize this. So as a result, you might find some ancestors whose last name was registered as their given name and their given name registered as their last name. So this is important to keep in mind also when you are conducting research. You'll see that I included a little screenshot in the bottom right here, which is of a laborer who arrives in Hawaii. He's called Wang Fong. Now, we don't actually know, looking at this document, if Wong is his surname or if Fong is his surname. And so your first stage really is figuring out which is the surname. Did the immigration official follow the Chinese style of putting the surname first, or did they actually already flip the surnames, the surname with the given name? So if you're not sure which is the surname, you can use the My China Roots surname database to figure this out. So just going to share now the My China Roots database. Okay, checking, you can still see my screen. So this is the homepage when you open the My China Roots library website. This is the homepage for the search. You can search for names here. It's a lot like Ancestry.com. You can explore the different types of collections that we have. But under this top right-hand menu here, which is, let me zoom in just a tiny bit, you have other resources that can help you start up your search. So let's say I'm not sure that my ancestor, because I've gone so far back, I'm actually now not sure if his surname is actually Wong or if it's Fong. So what I could do is open the Chinese surname page, and I'm going to type in Fong just to see what comes up, if it is indeed a surname. And yes, it turns out Fong is a very common last name, found amongst a lot of different overseas Chinese groups. It's popular in many different countries, and it could relate to these different Chinese surnames. Now, at this stage, I could do several things. I could call up my mum and ask her, oh, do you know in this branch of our family what the surname means? Have you ever heard about this? Or what I could do also is compare which regions this surname is found in. And I can just click through and see what else I can find out. So this first one, Fong, is found primarily in the United States. So I'm just going to click through to see what I can learn. Here I can discover more about the surname's origins. I can see what records of people surnamed Fong are on the database. So we have some Chinese exclusion records, we have immigration records, we have death records, we have association directories. And at the bottom, so we have a breakdown of where Fongs come from historically in Southeast China, so in Guangdong or Fujian province, which is where most overseas Chinese historically come from. And at the bottom, I can also see a breakdown of this same surname by dialect and by country. So if I scroll down to the US, I can see that this same surname has been spelled in all of these different ways. F-E-N-G, F-O-N-G, F-O-O-N-G. And again, this informs me that if I were to come across another record of Wong Fong, but the name was spelled with a F-U-N-G instead of O-N-G, then I wouldn't be surprised. This seems to be typical. This has happened before. So this is where you could start, even if you don't actually read any Chinese. You can learn quite a lot about this. Okay, and so going back to the search, I could, of course, also search for Wang Feng by his name. I just want to show you briefly how this works. So you can, of course, add a lot of different fields, like a possible residence. You can also add birth dates, birthplaces. But in general, I would recommend not adding too many fields, especially because there was so much variation in how names were transcribed. It's better to keep your search general and then filter later on. So I'm just going to search with the first and last name. And you can see I have over 500 results for Wang Feng, which really tells you how common this name is. But I have different categories of records that have been found. We have exclusion records, sorry. So these are going to be a mix of books, so registers of Chinese people entering the US with their status. So it would state whether they were allowed in, especially during the Chinese exclusion, whether they were students or laborers or merchants. We also have census records, immigration case files, and birth, marriage, and death records. So you can use these sidebar filters to narrow your search, also by gender, by dates, and by type of record. Okay, so that's the search. Now I'm just going to go back to my slides. I just wanted to open a little parentheses, actually, because I think it is important. But when it comes to the decision of choosing a name for your children, historically, and still to this day, really, Chinese parents take the process of selecting a Chinese given name very seriously. They would usually names that represent their hopes and dreams for their children. Now, traditionally, these names tend to be heavily gendered. And what I mean is, if someone has a boy, then they would probably choose a name that's associated with very masculine qualities, like strength and power and things like that. Whereas women's name tend to symbolize things like elegance and beauty. I mean, my name, Mei Ling, is a very traditional, very girly name. It literally means pretty jade bells. That it's beautiful tinkling sound of jade bells. So it's, it's all right. It's pretty, but that's kind of all it is. I'll always remember, though, one of my university Mandarin teachers. She was a really special lady. She was super impressive, but she had an unusual given name. Her given name was Li, which is in Mandarin means strong or powerful. And it's very uncommon for women to have this kind of name. And it's because her parents thought they were going to have a boy. But then when she was born, they thought, never mind, let's just still go with this name anyways. And she really lived up to that name. She was a very strong-minded, slightly eccentric lady, very impressive, always did things her way. So it can be interesting to ask family members what the names of people in your family mean, because it can also tell you a lot about the frame of mind of the generation before. What were their hopes and dreams? You'll also see, depending on the time period, that certain types of names will come up more than others. For example, at the beginning of the communist, shortly after the communist revolution, you had a lot of names that embodied very communist ideals. So things like number one patriot, or I can't think of any right now, but you get the gist of it. So names mean a lot, and they can be in and of themselves a clue. Another case in which names are the clue is if you look at a given name, right? Actually, I'll go back to my slide before to show you. We said that given names in most cases are made up of two characters, like Kim Ying. So usually one of these two characters is the generation name. And what I mean by that is it is a name that it is a character that is shared by all of the relatives, all of the male relatives within the same generation. So in this example that I'm showing on the screen, you have a record of a guy called Kim Wing, Wong is his surname, in the US Census of 1940. And he's on the page with his brother, Kim Cheng. So Kim Wing and Kim Cheng have actually very similar sounding names. And that's because they share the generation character, Kim. And it's most likely that their zupu, or their clan, their family tree book, basically instructed their parents that they had to name their children using this name. Meanwhile, the generation before them, their father, their uncles, will probably have a different character, but they will have that character in common. And this is important because if you can trace several generations in your family tree, this can help you understand relationships in your family. It's quite common, as you're doing research, that you come across the same names. They seem to pop up, on a census record. It seems to be a brother or a cousin, but you're not sure. And if you recognize one of the names within their given name, then it's likely that this would be a relative, either a brother or a cousin or an uncle. So keeping track of these tangential names can be very helpful, and it can help you identify your family tree book. So I'm going to, again, show you an example. So coming back to the My China Roots webpage, if you go to the search item on the menu, you'll see you have the option to search for all our records, or you can search by record category. We've just put the main ones here, but you can also access them from the home page here. So I'm going to click on Zupus, or family tree books. Now, just a bit of context about these books. We usually call them the Holy Grail in Chinese genealogy because they're insanely valuable to anyone that is doing Chinese family history research, and to anyone who wants to go beyond the migration path of their families. So these books are usually written by family members, by clan members, in the village that the family is from. So they're a private document, but they'll record all of the names of all the people within the surname group. So for example, my dad is Malaysian Chinese. His granddad came from China to Malaysia. And the little village that he comes from in China happens to share my surname. So it's called Yap Village, and almost all the people that live there are of the surname Yap, and we are all distantly related. And there is a book that some old guy who has been living there, but unfortunately recently passed away, there's a book there that records how we are related and who were the first Yaps that arrived in that particular village. So traditionally, the way to find your family tree book with all of the information inside it would have involved traveling to your village, trying to communicate with the villagers, asking questions, then providing the name of your ancestor, of your Chinese ancestor, and then checking if it appears in the book or not. But with the My China Roots database, you can circumvent all of these very complicated steps. And if you have a Chinese name, you can simply search directly whether the name appears in any of our digitized books. So we have a big collection of books. These books are full text searchable. So we have yet to really index. We have indexed one or two only. So instead, what you can use is the full text search. Unfortunately, for this one, you do need to have access to the Chinese characters. So you can either obtain them from elsewhere in the database, or you could type them yourself, or you could copy paste them depending on what clues you have at hand. And then just run the search and see what comes up. So I'm going to copy the name of Richard Wong, the little boy that we saw earlier in my slides. So this was his Chinese name, Kim Ying or Jin Ying, and typing in his last name, Wong. So this is quite handy also, even if you, if you can't type Chinese, when it comes to last names, not first names, but last names, you can type in using letters and it will suggest Chinese characters that you might be referring to. So I remember vaguely what the character looks like. It looks like this one. You may want to compare with whatever record you were looking at before. So I'm going to select this one and run the search. So it's found 44 results of this Wong Kim Ying person in a variety of different family tree books. Some of these are from different regions in China, from Nan'an, from Shishi. So they are from these two provinces, mostly Fujian and Guangdong, but we have many other regions of China available. So I'm just going to give you an example of one. This one's pretty good. So this looks like quite a modern publication, modern version of a zupu, but it's cool in that it is set up like a tree. So you can see exactly where the generations are. And it's highlighted in yellow where the match appears. Now, if you don't read Chinese, you can use this hovering dictionary. All you need to do is hover over characters and click on them, and it will show you the meaning of the characters. So this is a typical zupu. You'll see that it has names, and sometimes it has additional information, like it says, whether it's a daughter or a son. It will also tell you if they were, if they moved abroad or if they married someone from a neighboring village. Sometimes they're a lot more detailed. They could have things like birth dates, burial places, and more detailed biographies. But roughly, this is what you're looking at inside a family tree book. Okay, so what you can also do when you're at this stage, if you're interested in really narrowing down your book and figuring out if it is the one for your family, then your next step would be, okay, let me check if this name matches my ancestors. Then I would check whether the father's name, which is the level above, whether it matches. And then I would track back the previous page or the next page to see whether the father's father also matches. And if I have 2 generations at least that are matching, then I know that this likely is my book. And some of these books, they can go back hundreds of years. So you can unlock one by one generation at a time, your entire lineage for 400, 500 years, sometimes more, in one go. So this is quite a powerful resource. And we've had a lot of users who, without even reading any Chinese, have been able to do this detective work by themselves, just using the tools available. The other thing you definitely want to check is where this book was published and which village, what is the ancestral place. So here I can see that it's from Anxi County. And if I click on it, I can see where this place is in China. So you want to check that the location matches where you know your family to be from. Okay, so this was just a very quick tour of family tree books. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to... Yes, there was something else I wanted to show you, actually, which is that back on the homepage of the family tree book search, the other thing you can do is instead of searching for a keyword, search for your surname with the place that you know your family is from. And the reason you might want to do that is just to get an idea of what books are available. So for example, I type in my surname, Yap. Okay, it suggests the Chinese characters. And I'll type in my ancestral province, which is Fujian, just to get a broad, a breadth of results. And then again, I can see what are the available books, where they are available. And now the cool thing with some of these is that they won't only have family trees inside them. They can also have detailed biographies, portraits of famous ancestors, instructions for conducting rituals and things like that. But they can also have, and I don't think it had this particular one has it, but it can also have generation poems. So I was just talking about generation names a second ago and how they can inform who is related to who and what is their generational rank. So to give you an example, I found actually two books that are from the My China Roots database that have this generation poem. So it can look kind of like a table or literally just like 2 lines of text, really. So on the right-hand side is a more traditional book from 1945. And this part here that you see, it's about 20 characters. They don't really mean anything grouped together, but they each embody a sort of different feeling. So everyone from the first generation will need to incorporate this first character, the top one, into their name. Then all of their children will need to use the second character in their name, and so on and so forth. The generation poem on the left-hand side makes it a little bit easier. It states the generation number. It'll say, okay, if you're of the generation rank 209, according to our book, then you must have this word in your name. And people followed this poem generally to the letter. Even if they moved abroad, they would, check back with the village and ask, okay, I'm having kids. How should I name them? So it's really handy, again, to, if you can't initially find the name of an ancestor, to check for the generation poem. This requires a little bit more, ease and comfort in looking at Chinese characters and maybe asking for assistance, but the benefits could be huge. Okay, so we looked at the structure of Chinese names. We looked at how their meaning can be very intentional and how it can in itself be a clue for our research. But the next big tip that I want to emphasize in this talk is you should always assume that you're going to find many, many different names for the same ancestor. And I'm coming across this issue all the time when I'm looking for case studies or just trying out the database as we add new collections. Recently, I came across this pretty interesting case, which is of another Chinese Hawaiian guy called QC Lam, Quan Chok Lam. And I was really struggling to find some records of him initially. And it turns out that he was recorded on different records as Quan Chuk, but Chuk being spelled with a U, and Quan sometimes being spelled with K and KW instead of QU. This is very, very common. And it's just something that happened a lot in the early days because there was no standard way of spelling Chinese names. And yeah, it's something that you have to keep in mind. Also, when you are searching, you may want to try different spellings that you might think would come up, or spellings of words that sound kind of similar. To make your life easier, though, on the My China Roots database, we have added this checkbox underneath the advanced search. So if you expand any search when you're looking for an individual, you could just run a plain search and not check these, and you'll still get some partial results. But if you want to really broaden your scope and include any records that sound kind of similar, then you can check these boxes, and then it will return any results for similar sounding names. Okay, just checking. Oh, checking on comments. I see that Lao Sa Bao runny salted egg bun. Yeah, a struggle that you've had is that your family does not speak Mandarin, but instead a mix of other dialects, which makes it very difficult to regulate information from other sources. Yes, this is a very common challenge. I mean, a lot of Chinese people who have left China over the last 300 years, 250 years or so, didn't speak Mandarin to start with, spoke Cantonese, Hokkien, Shanghainese dialect. And it's only really after Mandarin became the official language of China that pinyin and standardized way of spelling names were introduced and sort of normalized even overseas. So this is partly why we put together the surname database and also the village database that's available through the website to overcome these challenges. Yeah. Okay. Going back to my presentation. The other reason why you might find many, many different names for the same individual is actually a cultural one. So it is typical for Chinese men in particular to have multiple aliases. This is just something that happened that was totally normal. And I think it was a friend of Gar's, Gay, who works for the Chinese American Museum in LA, in fact, Kamla. She calls these milestone names. And I love the term because that is kind of what they were. They were names that an individual would adopt as they went through different stages in their life. So they'd often start with a milk name, but they would also have different names used in different contexts that would usually represent, them reaching adulthood. They would have a style name for this, for example, an art name, a posthumous name that is sometimes recorded on the tombstone. Anyway, you don't need to remember all of these different types of names. In fact, we do have an article about different types of names on the My China Roots Genealogy Wiki, which is also available under our resources. But for now, the main thing I want you to take away is that it's typical. And that is exactly why you might find some records, one exclusion case file that has one name, but it's very different to the name on the tombstone. And again, this is why finding out the Chinese characters can help you, because the Chinese characters are more uniquely identifying than an English name, because there are so many Chinese names and Chinese characters that could be spelled Wa or Sui. But if you have the Chinese characters, you're more likely to know whether you've got the right person or not. Now, if you're dealing with many different names, you want to be looking out for records that might have Chinese signatures or that might record these variant names. And tombstones is a fantastic resource for this. Here I've got an example that's actually from the Chinese cemetery of Los Angeles. And this individual, Jim Wa Sui Wong, it's a bit intriguing. He has four words in his name in English. And it's not super clear which one is his surname if you don't read Chinese. But on the database, we would tell you which is the surname. We know which one is the surname because of his Chinese characters, which are inscribed underneath. And in fact, the tombstone doesn't only record his one Chinese given name. It also includes here his style name, his zi, which is the name given to men when they reach adulthood, and how he was known with his friends. So tombstones is a fantastic resource. Also, I haven't added an image here, but we have a certain number of Chinese immigration case files on the database. Some have images, some don't. Those that have images actually have a lot. Maybe I can just, let me show you an example actually. Since we're here, let me see. Let me go to immigration and travel, or actually exclusion records. So these exclusion case files are basically case files that were created that gather all of the supporting documents that Chinese immigrants added to their application when they needed to enter the US. So during the exclusion period, they needed to prove that Chinese people needed to prove that they were allowed into the country. And this is regardless of whether they had already been living there and just went on holiday and wanted to come back, or if they were entering for the first time. They needed to just provide a lot of supporting documentation. And these are found in case files. So a lot of case files, unfortunately, have been indexed, very briefly, which means that you only will really find a name and sometimes some relative information, maybe a date if you're lucky. And this is something that we're working on at My China Roots, that we're trying to improve, because these case files are so rich. Some of them can be 50 pages long. What we have been doing is slowly making our way through some of these and extracting more information. Sometimes they'll have records of interviews, but also signatures and photographs. So here I think is an example of one case file that we started working on, which is of a guy called Chin Bok Sui. And you'll see we have recorded his Chinese name. So if I click view in the original record, it actually has a lot more pages. Well, just one actually, but the page itself has a lot of information. It records not only this person's name, but his wife, has pictures of his wife, of his son that we assume he's trying to bring over to the US. It has his signature in Chinese, which is why we've transcribed that. And it has all sorts of other information about his travels to China and other relatives and their ages and his journey throughout the US. He seems to have lived in many different places, as well as in China. So these are some records that I recommend looking for: case files, tombstones, and also I would say association records and directories. Just refresh this. If I scroll back to the bottom here, these association and directory records are also quite unique in that we have student directories, we also have association records, and we also have business directories of different Chinese communities. Again, they're great because they will have bilingual information of individuals. So on any of these sources, you can search for someone within this book or within this collection of records. You could also click to view all persons that are found in this record. And browse them in this way. Okay, let me move on because I'm conscious of time. One special case that comes up a lot with names that I want to spend a bit of time talking about is nicknames. And maybe some of the people watching will have found records of ancestors that contain this word "ah." This is very common: "ah Fong," "ah Wong," "ah Lam." And these are tricky. These are very tricky because they're typically used for nicknames. And usually if that is all you get in a name, if all you know is "ah Fong," then most likely the Fong, the second part of the word, will refer to the surname of the person. So it's like calling someone, "Oh, that's my old friend, old Fong." But because Fong is such a common surname, or Lam or Wong, these are such common surnames that you could find hundreds or thousands of records of Ah Fong, but these are all referring to different people. I'll always remember working on this project a few years ago, which was probably one of the most exciting research projects I've ever worked on. But we were hired by a documentary film company to investigate the stories of the 6 Chinese survivors of Titanic. We didn't know anything about these men. There were 8 to start with, 2 of them died, and then 6 survived after Titanic. But no one knew what happened to them. They were on the list of people who were rescued, but no one knew where they ended up, what they were doing. It turns out that they were actually working as sailors. They worked on a lot of ships around Europe and then around America. But we knew barely anything about them. We didn't even know if they had kids, if they had families, who their descendants were. And there was one guy who we found seemed to have stayed in the UK for quite a while. His name was Lam. So we knew nothing about him, basically, except for his age and his surname, which was Lam. And it was honestly like searching for a needle in the haystack. Try and find, which of all of these sailors called Alam is the same Alam as the one who went on the Titanic. Luckily, there was one crew list of one of the ships that he worked on that we knew it was him. It was the same guy because there were no other Lams. And he recorded his name as Lam Choi. And even though in the end, you'll have to watch the film, but even though in the end it was very difficult to really pinpoint what happened to him, it did help us progress and find what could have been a record of him. The image on the right is not from the database. It is an identity certificate for Chinese seafarers, Chinese seamen from the UK that shows that he worked on a few ships in 1918, 1920, and that he was from Hong Kong. So again, always assume you will find more than one name for the same person. Don't be surprised. And just to close off on this topic, if the name Fong, Wong, Lam is combined with another name, so if you have a name, for example, Lam, Hong, or Wong, Fong, then it's more likely that the Hong part is actually the very last part is a shortened version of the given name, whereas the word at the front is the surname. So it does give you a little bit more. But what I would suggest in this case is if you're running many searches and are not finding anything, try searching without the or assume that there might have been another character instead of which is just used as a placeholder. So this is one interesting use case. Now, I want to talk a bit briefly about paper names also. Some of you, especially those whose ancestors came during the exclusion period, may find that some of their family members were paper sons. So what was this phenomenon of paper sons exactly? This really arose especially after the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, when a lot of certificates and just documents were destroyed in the fires, which created an opening really for a lot of people who aspired to settle in the US and be accepted to immigrate. Basically, people who were already in the US could claim that they were born there, or if they already had US citizenship, they could claim that they had relatives, they had wives or children back in China who could join them in the US. So there were a few, exceptions to who could settle in the United States. If you were a merchant, if you were a student, if you were the wife of a merchant, you could come over. In the end, what happened was that a lot of people could get these permissions, were allowed to bring their wife, their children over, but they just sold this paperwork to, more distant relatives, or maybe even neighbors or people from neighboring villages. And this is why some people ended up immigrating under a paper name or a fake name, a presumed name. Now, this, of course, complicates things because you end up with what you think is a real name, but actually is not the person's real name at all. One of the ways that you can figure out if the person is a paper name or not, is a paper son or not, is again to look for records that have Chinese characters, in this case it will mostly be tombstones. I came across this really interesting case recently. This is a tombstone of someone buried in the Tongsen Cemetery in South San Francisco. And what's interesting is that their surname, what I assume is either Ju or Choi, perhaps, Ju or Choi, is just, it's impossible that this English name matches the Chinese characters. Even if you imagine it being said in different dialects, they just don't match at all. The Chinese surname that's recorded in Chinese is Lao or Liu, which is nowhere to be seen in the English part of the inscription. So this is a pretty good clue to me that the English name is a paper name, but immigration officials don't read Chinese. They're never going to check what name you inscribe in Chinese on your tombstone. So they probably felt okay writing the person's actual name. So this would be my tip for really investigating whether an individual is a paper son or not, is trying to find the tombstone. Even if it's not on the database, try to find out where your family members were buried. Okay. And one of the last case studies I want to go over is women. So I think it's generally more challenging to research female Chinese ancestors, primarily for cultural reasons. Historically, unfortunately, China being a very patriarchal society, it was believed that women don't really need to be remembered by their given name. And so you'll find in overseas sources, in, for example, census records, in passenger lists, you'll find a lot of instances of women recorded as something she, Chan she, Wong she. Now, she is not a name. She is just a word that means maiden name. So what it's telling you is that this is Miss Chan, Ms. Wong, Ms. Lee. So again, similar to the Ah Fong problem, you might have many, many hundreds or thousands of results for Chan Shi or Wong Shi. This is not always the case, of course. You'll find a lot of Chinese exclusion case files and census records and tombstones that will have more information, that might have given names, that might have alternative names. And in family tree books also, in the Chinese records, you'll find that it's typical to omit daughters entirely. I mean, makes me, kind of frustrated, but that's just... that is just how they did it a lot of the time. They would state, for example, in the family tree book, they'll say, this individual, he had 3 sons. Their names were this, this, and this. And he had 2 daughters, but he doesn't bother mentioning their name. They do record in family tree books the surnames of wives who marry into the family. So it's still helpful to identify your ancestors within a family tree book if you know the maiden name of a female ancestor. But generally, you'll need to, if you're looking for records of a female ancestor, you'll probably need to search for her in addition or in parallel with her son or her father or other relatives. There are ways around it. And even in family tree books, even in old traditional family tree books, I've seen some that actually record a lot more information about women, including, where her birth village is. So it does vary. There is this conception that women are just completely excluded from records, which is not really the case. You can actually find female ancestors, but it's a question of patience and knowing where to look. So I'll give you just a quick example of what I mean when looking for female ancestors. So let's see, we had a case earlier on of a lady called Guiying Sito. So this is an unusual 2-character Chinese last name. And she is buried with her husband in the Chinese cemetery of Los Angeles. You'll see we've tagged her Chinese surname and her Chinese first name. And
Clotilde?
Yes.
There is a comment from someone based on what you were just last talking about that I just wanted to point out to you because it kind of relates to what you were saying a little bit.
Yes, thank you. So Celia writes, oh, you're Malaysian Chinese too. Nice. Me too. And Celia writes, the daughter's names were not engraved on your mother's tombstones. She passed in 2011. Yes, I mean, I don't know in this case who was involved in the inscription, but often it will be children who are, in charge of that job. So I found that in more recent years, it really varies on from one family to the next. It depends how involved you are and how eager you are to have your name inscribed for legacy if you want to. But yeah, I'd be curious to learn more like where this burial took place, whether it was in Malaysia or elsewhere. Yes, you know, and I've also seen back in China a lot of clan associations, the ones that publish family tree books, they take this much more seriously as well. And they started including living female members, which 20, 30, 40 years ago, would never have been the case, would never have been considered an option. But it's becoming just more balanced in general. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, you may be interested.
They were buried in Malaysia.
Yes, you may be interested in looking at some of. We have a few Malaysian obituary resources and Singaporean tombstones. I find that some of the older, especially Hokkien tombstones, when they are bilingual, both in English and in Chinese, sometimes they'll have the full family tree on the gravestone. This is even more common in Southeast Asia than the US, I find, to have full family trees on the gravestone. So it'll basically be like an obituary. It'll say, oh, this person passed away and leaves behind sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, with their names in both English and Chinese. Another reason why tombstones are great. But I just want to wrap up, and then I can answer more questions. But on just coming back to this tombstone record here, what's interesting here is that Gui Ying is buried with her husband, George Chuck. This is quite common for couples to be buried together. So we know that her married name is Sito because it's the same one as her husband. What's interesting, though, is that her maiden name is recorded on the Chinese part, even though it's not there in English. So her maiden name is tagged here. So if I click on it, I can see what it is. It is Deng, or Teng. And if I click on it, it links me to the page on the surname database with records that are available and also different spellings by dialect. So I can guess that it was probably, I don't know, pronounced something like Deng or Tong or Tong back in the US. So, just going back to the tombstone and to show you again the Zupu search, really. So whenever you are on the database, and this kind of goes back to your comment, Julie, about, how can people really make use of the tools if they don't read or if they can't write in Chinese. So whenever there is a Chinese name on a record on the database, we'll automatically try to search for it in our collection of family tree books. So here at the bottom, you see find family records of Gui Ying Sito, and the system has found one match. So if you click on it, you should be able to see full text matches of Gui Ying Sito's name in Chinese in the Chinese collections. At this stage, I've typed nothing in Chinese. I've only been typing in English. I have just been clicking on the links that are shown to me on the page. And there's only one match, which is kind of interesting. This is for a book for the Sito family of Kaiping or Hoiping. If I click examine matches, it should open the viewer with the name that is found on the page. So it's highlighted in yellow. Now, I don't actually know if this is actually the same Gui Ying, but I would need to compare, the surname and also the other people recorded here. It doesn't look like it's her, but it is definitely a woman's name because Gui Ying means something like osmanthus, pretty flower. So this is just to illustrate that female names definitely appear on records. And if you have the Chinese characters, again, this can help you in finding more about them. Okay, let me see. I think that is all I wanted to show you. And to wrap up, yeah, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And as a recap, if you are a member of the Los Angeles Public Library, then you can access all of these resources at mychinarootslibrary.com for free, or via the LAPL website. If you do want your library to subscribe, then feel free to email me. My email is there on the page, and we can sort it out. And don't forget, if you do want to subscribe and get your own account and build your own family tree and be able to bookmark things, then you can use this code LAPL24 until the end of May. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And while we're waiting for people to maybe write comments, I had a couple questions for you.
Sure.
And I'm not sure if you're going to know the answer, but I was just kind of curious if you know how the Cultural Revolution might have impacted the tradition of recording family. Maybe did it impact Zupu books? Do you know that at all?
Yes, of course. I mean, it definitely has impacted the tradition. There was a time period where people were forbidden from engaging in any practice that was associated with tradition. So if you wanted to be a good communist, you supposedly were not supposed to have your family was not supposed to have a zupo. You were not supposed to update it. But I would say that this varied a lot from one region to the next. So the further away from Beijing and the capital that people were, the less strict it tended to be. I'm generalizing a lot, of course, it varied a lot, but that has been my observation. And also with time, the practice came back. So often you would have maybe a few years where nobody did anything and they tried not to, attract any attention by continuing to compile the zupu. So you might have gaps in the books themselves. I remember the early days, we worked for one Singapore customer who was looking for his family tree book. And we went to the village. We couldn't find it in the village. And basically what happened was that one of the relatives, because of the Cultural Revolution, was worried that the book would get destroyed. And so traveled to Singapore to save the book and donated it to a local association there. So the book was no longer in China, but it was overseas. That happens too. We've also heard stories of, in our research, we've come across stories where families hid the books, buried them underground or in between walls so that they wouldn't be found and they wouldn't be destroyed. That happened also. There are also, on the other extreme, cases where unfortunately relatives that were sort of overcome with feelings of patriotic and communist fervor destroyed the books themselves. That is very, very sad, but does happen. What I will say is that in the last 30 years, there's been a resurgence of interest in keeping these documents, which is why on our database you'll find more modern publications, more modern books, because people come together and they're like, okay, let's catch up on what we've missed out on and update old records and pour more money into doing the research and interviewing all of the members of a village to get all of the names in one place. So there is, of course, an impact, but it is not as great as what people assume. Yeah. Sorry, that was a very roundabout answer.
No, that was very interesting. I was kind of comparing it a little bit to Eastern Europeans and Jewish people when the Holocaust happened and a lot of their records were destroyed. I was wondering if it would have been something as extreme as that.
It depends where. Yeah.
Yeah. One more thing I've got is I was fascinated by your your talk about generation poems,
Mm.
and I wondered who chose the names that would be used for each generation in those poems. Was it the first person who was ever named in the Zupu
Mm.
book? Do you happen to
That's
know
a
that?
very good question. I'm actually not 100% sure. Some of them, some of them may have been set by a famous ancestor, I guess, either the first person of a branch or, yeah, the first person who arrived in one of the hubs. But that's a great question, actually. I should ask my researchers who are much more knowledgeable about Zulpus than I.
Because that's some chutzpah, you know. You're like saying, "Hey, I'm the first person in this family, and I want everybody from now on to name their generations this
Yeah,
name." You
yeah,
know.
yeah. It's a bold move.
I do have a question here from Robert. Let me bring
Yes.
that up.
Okay. I mean, if you're talking about today, the modern day, I would say there's not really a strong sense of communist community, to be honest. There's definitely, no issues with either digitizing or preserving or publishing these types of records anymore. It's absolutely normal. People are not being discriminated against for doing it. There's absolutely no issue there. Yeah. Okay, next question. How often immigrants who have left China continue to obey Zupu rules? Again, I think it really depends on the family. If families kept decent ties with the village back in China, and also if they kept some of the language and continued speaking whatever language they spoke back home, then I found that they would continue to obey the Zupu rules. But as soon as you have families that lose the language, like in my family's case, for example, I mean, in my case also, the original Zupu was destroyed, so there was not really a poem to go off of anyway. But that tends to lose itself a little bit. So people will take more liberties with assigning Chinese names. But I would say it depends on the family and also the country. I think in some parts of Southeast Asia, some communities, like in Malaysia and Singapore, will be quite strict, depending on which family they belong to, of course, and will continue to follow the poem.
Well, I think that's the last question, but we've got some great comments from people who enjoyed your show. Your talk. And I wanted to mention that next month, on Saturday, May 18th, at the same time, Clotilde will be back to talk about those Chinese genealogy books called Zupu that she mentioned as being insanely valuable for Chinese family research. And so that talk will be really great. I'm so looking forward to that because they're so beautiful. They're works of art, in my opinion. And you can find out how to access and analyze these books for your own family history next month. And I'm going to be sending out an email reminder just in case you forget about it. But Clotilde will be back. And thank you so much for this today. It was really, really a great talk. And I always appreciate your time with us.
No, same here. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the great questions, too.
Okay. We'll see you next month.
See you soon. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Julie. Bye, everyone.